Okay, we're back. I don't know what happened there. Some kind of crazy QCast moment where we stopped or we just kind of blanked for a second. So we're going to cut this up into part one and part two, but we're back with Mike Schauer, National Committee Chair. And Mike, we were talking about the Pool C process and kind of the gravity as you guys are picking this thing and you get down to 18, 19, 20. When you pick that number 20, realizing that it's the end of the road for some very talented teams. And I can't imagine what that process is like for your committee, because you're all basketball people or athletic administrators. You're people that are around student athletes and care about student athletes and coaches. What is that like as you get to the end and you're realizing that, the season is ending for some of these teams?
Yeah, again, I think you feel the weight of that, right? And you're really excited for those 20 teams. And what we really want to do is sort of check, are we comfortable and believe we picked the 20 most deserving teams? We recognize that 21, 22, 23 are going to have an argument to be made that's legitimate, and we need to acknowledge and own. But we share in the excitement of it. But I do feel, the weight of what we did, because I think in my career, I've been 18, 19, 20 and gotten in. And I think a few times, we were probably someplace just outside of it. So I know that feeling. And so why the committee, we just want to do the best we can to make sure we get the right 20 teams in based upon the criteria, and sort of rest in that, realizing that no matter what we do, there's going to be a disappointed handful of teams who deserve consideration, and ultimately we chose to go a different direction.
I want to talk about bracketing a little bit, and this is something that I think a lot of people will find interesting. So let me ask you just a few questions about bracketing. I believe I understand how this works, but this is kind of a complicated deal because of geography. When the bracket comes out every year, I believe there are 4 teams kind of on a top line, so to speak. So I believe it's fair to say that you end up having like 4, I'm going to use a Division I term, 4 number 1 seeds that are the top seeded team in your process across 4 quadrants. Is that a true statement to start out with?
Yeah, it's true-ish is the way I would say it. Is we never acknowledge a true seeding of the tournament. So unlike Division I, where they would acknowledge 1 through 16 and would state it, we don't state it quite that clearly. And the reason simply is it's very difficult economically to do that, because we're going to have some teams play each other that probably aren't the seed that they should be because of geography and cost. But broadly speaking, we are attempting to take a regionalized process and make it as national as we can. So we do try to identify hosts from around the country, around various regions, that sort of allow us to maximize the national feel of it, while sort of maintaining the fact that teams from the Northeast are predominantly going to play teams from the Northeast early on, and so forth. But we will identify the most deserving teams in those regions, if that makes sense. I mean, we're going to try to identify those teams as best we can. But to say they're necessarily 1 through 4 and they're seeded that way, and we acknowledge this team is 1 and that team is 4, so the 4th seed we're going to try to give a slightly more difficult path to, but the 1 seed we don't do any of that stuff. I mean, there's too much cost and geography restrictions to truly do that. But yes, we do try to identify teams that are most deserving to host in certain regions of the country, depending upon who's deserving to get in, and candidly, who's deserving to host.
So in other words, if according to the criteria that the best 4 resumes in the country were like Williams, Wesleyan, Amherst, and St. Joseph, Connecticut, those
would not all. They
can't be.
They could potentially host, I guess, but they couldn't be what you described.
Right. You can't you can't have 4 brackets with them as the top seed, because it just geographically would never in a million years work out.
Correct.
The impact of the 500-mile rule turning to the 600-mile rule. So it used to be that if teams were more than 500 miles from each other, you had to fly them. So I believe that I can't remember if it's Augustana to Worcester's 500.0 miles, but I have these in my head. Now it's 600. Does 600 change bracketing at all?
That's a great question. The obvious answer is I would assume it does, as it broadens a little bit the number of teams that we could drive to or take a bus to, as opposed to purchasing the flight. And obviously the flight is more expensive than the bus. But if I'm honest with you, Bob, I think we're all going to kind of learn how. I'm not quite sure how that will impact the bracketing until we've done it one time, and we've never done it. So I would imagine it will impact it. How much and to what degree, I guess I don't quite know. We'll find out as we go.
We talked about financial constraints, but let's touch on that just one more time. You guys can't just fly whoever you want to wherever you want, right? We've talked about the example of the West Coast. Do you have a certain amount of flights? You mentioned earlier, you mentioned 5 in November. It's not exactly that, but is there a number you're given of some sort, like, hey, you guys got to stay to this, or how does that work?
No, not that specifically. And I probably spoke too concretely in November. We are not given a specific number. We are asked to be stewards, and the historical average is around 5. So obviously we can't predict exactly how many flights, because you could end up having upsets that require flights that you didn't anticipate. So you try to put the bracket together and sort of say, well, this, if it progresses, these are probably our flights, but it's not an exact science. So we can have more flights than 5, but could we just sort of throw it out the window and go, well, let's do 12 flights in the first round? No, we can't do that either. There is a budget restraint that causes us to have to put together a bracket that recognizes we need to limit flights, is probably the better way to say it. We've got to be conscious of limiting the amount of flights we do.
One thing that's never been public is how you guys evaluate teams that are across regions. So let's think about what this means. There's 10 regions. We very much get to see how you rank the teams in the 10 regions. So next week, a week from today, I'm going to know the order of Region 8, whether WashU is ahead of Illinois Wesleyan, and where Wheaton stands, and where Elmhurst stands, and where Anderson stands. That I get. But in your process of making a bracket, it's obvious that you have to compare, let's say, Illinois Wesleyan to Platteville, or Illinois Wesleyan to Heidelberg. You have to do that to some degree. Can you talk about how that comes into play in the process?
Yeah, it'd be very similar to what we do in the regional rankings. So we would take the resume of Illinois Wesleyan and the resume of Heidelberg, and we would compare the winning percentage. And we generally start with winning percentage first. And there probably, there isn't a head-to-head. So that piece of criteria, goes out the window. I don't know the answer, whether there are common opponents. There could be. Those teams are geographically close enough that in theory, you could have a common opponent or two.
Right.
But probably not a significant one or significant numbers there. And so the next one we would go to then is strength of schedule. And really what you're seeing is is there either team that sort of has both of those categories in a commanding way, I guess would be the way to say it. And that's sort of a feel. What does that feel like? You're kind of looking for it. And then the last thing you do is, all right, regionally ranked wins. And how many does each team have? And who are those? And where would they appear in the regional rankings in their region? What is their resume like? And you're trying to get a sense of the quality of those regionally ranked wins. And then candidly, if that feels like a tie and we're not quite sure that one team clearly has the advantage of another, we would go to secondary criteria, and that is almost always non-conference strength of schedule. The other criteria just doesn't come into play very often.
Right.
And that's exactly how we would do it, Bob. We kind of start with the two bookend criteria, winning percentage and SOS, and then kind of try to figure out, okay, with regionally ranked wins and whatever criteria we have, is there clearly one of these two teams that have the better of the criteria? And that's in essence what we do within the regions themselves. The difference is when you're comparing Illinois Wesleyan to Anderson, for example, you probably do have common opponents because they are regional teams. And so you probably did play somebody along the way that was the same. When you start to compare teams across the country, you lose often head to head, and often common opponents don't come into play. So you're kind of using those other three criteria, and then if necessary, the secondary criteria.
And the reason this is so important is because the bracket, which I think is really cool, the bracket crosses regional lines here. So you can have Illinois Wesleyan and Wheaton end up in two different quadrants. In fact, that happens all the time, which I think is great. Or like you could take Oshkosh and Platteville, and one can be in one quadrant and one can be in another. That's why this is so important, because you have to go outside the region when you make the bracket, or you can. And to that degree, you're having to sort of create your own little mini regional rankings as you build the bracket, because you want to be respectful. You want to get accurate who's playing who. You don't want to put two teams that have these monster resumes against each other in round one. Am I saying all that correctly?
I would say two things. One, we work very hard, if we can, to ensure that conference opponents don't meet each other any earlier than the Sweet 16. Now,
Right.
I can't say that definitively, because there are some of these isolated situations where that gets difficult to do. And then you don't want to do something where you would have really high resumes meet in the second round. You try to avoid that as best you can. So you're trying to avoid conference games. You're trying to have 2 or 3 regions represented in a 4-team pod, if at all possible. And you're trying to spread it out as best you can. The best way to say it is we are taking a regionalized process and trying to make it as national as we can. It will never be truly national, because we are not going to fly the first round. We're not going to fly 4 East Coast teams out, to the West Coast. We're not going to do that. So it's not a true national tournament in that sense, but we want to try to make it as national as we can, given the constraints we have. So absolutely, we're looking at those things. The bracketing is actually a pretty complicated process. It's way more involved than I knew until I sat and watched us do it in 2020. It's a very lengthy process.
And the bracketing it's become really creative and cool. If you look at the last several brackets, if you look at the last bracket we all have, which is the one from 2020, the teams that were left on the table, some incredibly cool matchups. You had Elmhurst and Pomona Pitzer, you had North Central and WashU, Yeshiva and Randolph-Macon. So this thing, it's kind of something that has evolved. I can't remember, Mike, if you were the head coach at Wheaton, you know the term bracket of death, I assume, correct?
That was actually Bill Harris's last year. The bracket of death was my last year at Gordon, his last year here at Wheaton.
So the bracket of death is just a playful term that many of us gave this 2009, maybe. I don't know. What is that, the year 2000?
Yeah, it's 2008, 2009.
Where all of these monster teams all converged. And I think Wheaton hosted a sectional that year. I want to say, correct, that WashU emerged from, maybe. But
maybe they did. And so Wheaton played WashU in the Sweet 16 as 2 of probably the 5 best teams in the country. And I believe the other 2 teams there, I think, were St. Thomas. I'm trying to remember who the other one was. It was
crazy. It was
crazy.
And that I just bring this up to say we try to avoid that. Yeah, you try to avoid it, but there are times when you're not going to be able to avoid all of that, because there are certain pockets of the country where there are a lot of teams with great resumes, and it's hard to break them up. I mean, is that fair to say that you can't avoid all of that?
Can't avoid all of it. Yep. And in certain years, you really can't avoid it at all, depending upon where sort of the best teams are located. It can be very cumbersome. Yes.
I think it's kind of helped that, though, that there's so much parity in Division III now. When you look at, and I won't ask you about specific teams, so I'll just mention, like, when you look at great teams and where they are, the St. Joe's of Connecticut's, Randolph-Macon, Marietta, the Oshkosh and Platteville, and WashU, you've got a really good balance, not to mention the teams way out west. That probably helps you a little bit. So you can kind of feel better about the bracket when you know that you've got power everywhere. Probably gives you more flexibility.
No question. And I actually texted you. I was watching games one night and just texted you going, I can't remember who I was watching. I'm trying to watch games. There are just so many good teams around the country.
Right.
And I think some of that is a lot of us are a little older. We had players come back. So there's quite a bit of depth around the country. So yeah, this is as deep as I think Division III has been in a long time. It's just there are so many good teams.
Agree. It is amazing watching some of these. I've told the D3hoops.com guys they need to add 2 more All-American teams. And I'm not kidding. I think they need to add 10 players, because if you just look down the list, I don't even know how they're going to make the first team. It's so loaded, let alone the second and third teams. Leading to this announcement that you have, which is really cool. And we talked about bracketing and having to, like, we've never seen how you stack teams up across regions. So I'm really excited about what you guys have decided to do in the effort of like transparency and things. Talk about what you guys are going to release soon.
Yeah, so we're going to do a top 16 reveal. So our committee, and it'll be men's and women's, we're both going to do it simultaneously. We will do the next regional ranking will come out for us on Tuesday, obviously next week. On Wednesday, the committee will get together and we will do the process of picking the top 16 teams according to resume at Division III men's basketball. And then on Thursday night on NCAA.com, just like we would do the selection show, we are going to, Megan Wilson on my counterpart on the women's side, and I are going to announce the top 16 at that point for Division III men's basketball and for Division III women's basketball. And what that is, Bob, is a chance for people to see in real time who the committee thinks are the top 16 teams in the country.
That's
now
cool.
This is actually an exercise we have done previous years on the committee to just help us start to think through who do we think are the best resumes in the country right now. And we just decided it was really Mort's idea to reveal it. Let's let people see this process. Let's give out that information. So I would say a couple of things. One, I want to be very clear that it is unofficial and of no actual value in terms of, if you look back 2 weeks later and go, well, you had so-and-so fourth on that and they didn't get to host, it's of no real official value, but it will in real time let people see these are the 16 teams that would be certainly in consideration for hosting and that we think are the strongest resumes in the country. I just think it'd be kind of cool for people who are interested to kind of hear where the committee is at in real time after that first numeric ranking. And so what we're hoping to do is to announce that at 7 p.m. on that Thursday night on NCAA.com in sort of a show. I mean, where it's a chance for people to hear and then with some follow-up. So we're excited about it. I think it'll generate some buzz for those people who want to be a part of it. My hope is it's another level of transparency, another level of inviting people into the process to hear what the committee is thinking in real time. I think it's a great idea. And candidly, Bob, we're pretty excited to do it.
That's really cool. And it's not meaning that those 16 teams are absolutely host, because it will not take into account geography.
Correct.
It will just be the 16 best resumes. It's probably unlikely that all 16 of those teams are going to end up being hosts because of there's going to be a bunch all in this pocket, a bunch in this pocket. But what a cool idea for people. And look, it has tons of value for fans, because if I'm an Illinois Wesleyan fan and I see that Illinois Wesleyan is ranked behind Wisconsin Platteville, that is very telling to me in a lot of ways regarding hosting and things. So while it's not absolute, you're going to put something out there that's never existed. And I think people are going to find that actually pretty like cool and fun.
Yeah, I hope so. It's really the desire is to do two things. One, generate a little buzz through the process. And like I said, invite people into sort of the committees, some of the exercises we do to sort of prepare for Selection Sunday. that helps us start to think through, hey, who are the best resumes out there, and we're just going to share it. This is what we did, and here's what we think, and let's talk about it.
That's really cool. And kudos to you and the committee for coming up with that idea. And again, for all the transparency. I've taken a ton of your time, Mike, and I'm going to give you a chance to add anything that you haven't had a chance to talk about. I'll just say on my end, appreciate all of the incredible communication and transparency throughout this. Again, like you've reached out to me twice this year to say, hey, can I get on that thing you're doing and talk about the process? I'd like to make sure people understand this. That's you initiating this, which is incredible. You know, I think in the past people have done a really nice job communicating, but maybe not to this degree. I appreciate that, and I know everybody appreciates that. And you've also been very open about saying, hey, look, when the next ranking comes out, maybe we should talk again. So thank you for that. Let me kick it to you, Mike, for any final thoughts you have, anything we didn't get to, anything you want to leave with Division III basketball fans who are tuning in here.
Yeah, nothing specific. One, thank you, Bob, for being willing to give me a platform to kind of express some of this and some of the thoughts and an avenue to do that. I would just tell people, I'm a D3 basketball lifer. This is, if you count my playing days, this is 33 straight years of this for me, and I love it. And so while I'm an insider in one sense, at the end of the day, I'm also just a huge fan of small college basketball and Division III basketball. And so excited to be a part of this. I hope people kind of can sense that while it's a task that we take very seriously, it's also a blast and a great honor to do this. And so, I just invite people to stay with us, come along for the ride, and let's enjoy the next 4 to 6 weeks.
Yeah. Can you believe we're like 12 days from Selection Sunday? I mean, that's
Awesome.
probably one of the best times of the year if you're a Division III basketball fan. Folks, that is Mike Schauer, the national chair of the men's basketball committee, season 2, episode 14 of the QCast. It's getting really good, folks. So whoever you're following, I guarantee you there's a good game coming up tomorrow and the next day and the next day. And you're going to have that all the way through the national championships in Fort Wayne. Mike, thank you so much. And I look forward to our next conversation very soon. Okay.
Take care, Bob. Thank you.
Thank you.